Hey, went to the surplus store today. This fine military surplus jacket. It looks like it's new, but it's not. This is actually an Air Force pattern of ACU. It's even got the Air Force person's name in it. It's Pritchard right there. So this is Pritchard's jacket. I've already washed it. It's very, very nice. There's a little patch there I need to take off. Yeah? Isn't that nice? I mean, where else can you get super high quality mil spec for 30 bucks? Isn't that nice? Yeah. But you didn't believe me when I said I bought used clothing, huh? Well, I do. I like quality. Which would you rather? Some people would actually rather have like cheap garbage for like $100 or $200 than ultra high quality mil spec used for 30 bucks. Me being the more intelligent critter, I choose the used mil spec, used like new, for 30 bucks. Here's the fact, and of course many people have confirmed this, and that's not what this video is about. Remember when I made a prediction many years ago in countless different videos? I said they would discover that super high energy light would generate matter, and of course my prediction turned out to be totally true. I spent countless years not only thinking about magnetism, but also too about light and studying some really tough books with some really tough math. And I wish this guy was still alive that I could actually email him or send him a letter. He had 2 PhDs. He even wrote an interesting book on math. Is Dr. Oleg Jefamenko. Here's his one book called Electromagnetic Retardation and Theory of Relativity. It's actually against relativity. He's completely against relativity, and he's actually in support of the ether. I've got a couple of copies of this book. It's great. You can actually find it online. It's called Causality, Electromagnetic Induction, and Gravitation. Some interesting observations in here, and even though he's incredibly intelligent, he did not understand what electricity is, but he made observations from the Maxwellian field equations. This video, by the way, and it's not science fiction, I'm going to make a prediction that will prove to be as accurate as my prediction, which turned out to be true. They actually used constructive interference between 2 super high powerful lasers, and they found out that matter was created. All matter, of course, is compounded of hydrogen. I've actually said that matter fundamentally is circular frequency. A lot of people don't get that. And there have been many things made for like young and college people, and just people in general, educational things to talk about relative motion and Doppler effect, and like, how fast is a ball going if like it's on a train and it's going 100 miles an hour, and while you're on the train going 100 miles an hour, you throw it forward, relative motion and the Doppler effect. And of course we all know about the sound of Doppler effect of like a car horn, where you have compression as it's coming towards you, which of course would be analogous to blue shift. And of course rarefaction, which would be redshift as it's going away, like a train or a car, like, and of course we're all familiar with the Doppler effect of sound. Human beings, of course, can't see the Doppler effect of light, but using that crude analogy, which a lot of these relativists have actually tried to apply to light, because light is not a particle. However, at super high energy it does. This is actually genuine over-unity, and I thought this would, I spent a lot of time thinking about this, and I thought, well, how am I going to talk about this simply in a video? I thought about calling it like a light compression drive or a Doppler compression drive, but first getting on to light, and of course I've talked about light endlessly, countless different videos. It's not a wave, it's not a particle, it's not a wave-particle duality. It's, it doesn't have a speed. All of these idiocracies of, which is the name of the movie, I was talking about that recently as one of the most predictive movies called Idiocracy. I think everybody should see it. Idiotic ideas of relativity and quantum is that light is this das Lichtwand, as they called it. And by the way, not my idea, but their very own words. All of quantum is based upon what they think light is, which everything they say about light is incorrect. Everybody asks me, by the way, about the either the Michelson-Morley experiment or specifically the dual slit experiment. But you can't do an experiment on something if you don't know the nature of that which you're experimenting, using as the medium for experimentation. And all of these people have everything upside down and backwards about light. It's not an emission. It doesn't have a speed. That's the hysteresis of the medium or the rate of induction, which is the reason why Nikola Tesla said light was a sound wave in the ether. Well, sound is not an emission, it's a disturbance in the medium, that being oxygen and nitrogen. Nothing emits sound. Sure, things emit sound. We have the speed of sound, speed of light. It's like, well, let's talk about sound and move on to light. You know, sound's not an emission, it's a disturbance in a medium. That rate of induction, which changes depending on temperature, which of course would be density of oxygen and nitrogen, does change the same way that the so-called speed of light, which is not a speed, and light's not an emission, depending on what the induction is occurring at, either in a vacuum or in air or glass or water. And all of these are established by, well, it changes speed. And of course they violate their own premise about the nature of light, or what they think it is, by breaking the law of conservation of energy, by saying, look, when light leaves glass, it speeds up. Well, that breaks the law of conservation of energy. It's extremely illogical and completely impossible. Anyway, and I've talked about this endlessly, getting to the important point of this video, and it's extremely fascinating. But light, as far as circular frequency, which people seemingly can't wrap their mind around that, is that, of course, movement is capacitance, and of course a measure of induction, specifically a circular frequency, is no different than saying a propagation barrier, or saying a capacitance barrier. Because when light actually reaches a certain state and becomes a circular frequency, the propagation barrier occurs, and the propagation barrier is no different than saying the hysteresis of the medium. The hysteresis of the medium of air under set conditions is what we call the speed of sound. But the speed of sound doesn't mean that sound is traveling. Sure, sound travels. No, sound does not travel. The so-called speed of sound, sure, it broke the sound barrier. Remember the aircraft and the what do they call it, the right stuff? The first part of the movie, talk about breaking the sound barrier. And it actually breaks a barrier. Well, that's just the rate of induction at which the disturbance of the medium, being oxygen and nitrogen, occurs. And this is the reason why Nikola Tesla said that light was a sound wave in the ether. Think about that for a second. Nobody ever does think about it. People will quote Nikola Tesla about thousands of things, but that's really an extremely important quote from Tesla. Light is not an emission. That's the capacitance barrier, or the propagation barrier, or specifically the barrier of the hysteresis of the medium, just as the so-called speed of sound is the propagation barrier of a disturbance of sound. When I generate sound, of course, I'm creating a disturbance in oxygen and nitrogen. Same thing occurs with light. So everything that these relativists and these folks of quantum, and all of quantum, not my opinion or feeling or belief, their own words, not mine, is that all of quantum is based upon their understanding of the nature of light. But everything they say about light is completely incorrect. It's not an emission, it's not a wave. Of course, there's no such thing as a wave. Wave is not what something is, rather what something does. It's the rate of induction or hysteresis of the medium. No different than sound. Hence, of course, Nikola Tesla. Getting on to the important point here, since it's not a rate, not a speed, rather a rate of induction, when it reaches C, which is the propagation barrier, then of course the propagation transference ends. And then we have ultra high energy light, and as I predicted accurately many years ago in countless videos, they would discover super high energy light makes matter. This is the same reason why galactic jets, also too called astrophysical jets, go Google that, are emitting out trillions and trillions of tons of hydrogen. And hydrogen is just a silly word for ultra high energy light. Yeah. Hyperlogical, hyper-rational. So I had an epiphany quite some time ago, and I've been thinking about it endlessly, and I was looking for confirmation. Even some of the math is absolutely, is beyond almost anybody. When the math goes on to 2 pages, even past the page, some of this stuff is just skull-crushing, but I understand the concept, and if you understand the concept in the primer, then you can figure stuff out with the math. I thought of OVERUNITY light drive. You could actually call it like a blue shift ion propulsion, or a light compression drive. You know, what you call it, of course, is completely unimportant, but all these things kept popping into my head. Thinking about it, taking a shower, laying down, and so on and so forth. On an ion propulsion drive, we'd actually have an OVERUNITY drive. Like, for example, somewhere in the range of 350 nanometers, which is ultraviolet light, basically at 800 terahertz, of illumination in ultraviolet, a transformation of 3.4 average at 350 nanometers of 3.4 eV volts. of light at turning that into 9 electrovolts or electron volts, roughly, of ion propulsion. So when this 350 roughly nanometers of light is fired at 1/4 speed, 1/4 c, excuse me, which is the hysteresis or the propagation and barrier, induction barrier, the hysteresis of the ether, then you'd actually have induction over unity. And this is where this idea of, you know, throwing a softball, people, because I know people will say this in the video, well, it's no different than throwing a softball, or, you know, when you're on a bullet train, for example. You know, you're throwing a softball, you know, how much is it faster, is it traveling, relative to the 100 miles an hour that you're actually already traveling on the plane. That's not what this works, not how this can work, because light, of course, is an energy circuit. And the actual speed, or the hysteresis of the medium, or the energy barrier, changes the nature of what it is. The Doppler effect of the coaxial energy circuit itself, emitted from an object already traveling at that speed, changes its nature. And when it reaches that threshold, then of course it becomes matter. And then you'd have, at the matter, you'd have a hydrogen ion propulsion drive. This means that traveling at 1/4 c, when, for example, 350 nanometers of light, which is right at 3.4 eV, that's an energy value of the 350 nanometers of light, would spontaneously transform, and that is over unity. It would go from 3.5 eV to 9 plus eV. That's nearly 300% of over unity. And when the hydrogen spontaneously manifests, then you would actually have an ion drive. This means that a craft that means and purports itself to travel at extremely high speeds, which ion drive ideas have been around since the 1960s. It's like, well, the question has always been energy sources. Like, how can, and a lot of these craft, we could call them backwards engineered craft, call them field propulsion craft. I don't care if people call them alien craft. I'm only interested in the technology itself. How do you fit enough energy, unless it's an absolute 100% over unity energy device? And I'm not putting that down or poo-pooing it. But my point being is that if you're already traveling at 1/4 c, the firing at c, which doesn't require an enormous amount of energy, of 3.4 eV of light. So you're having to put in 3.4 eV of light, electron volts. You're putting in 3.4, you're ending up with 9 eV. 3.4 in, 9 eV out, and then you have a hydrogen ion propulsion drive. That's nearly, not exactly, but it's nearly 300% of over unity. Isn't that fascinating? And you can't start talking about like golf balls on airplanes or throwing baseballs inside of you know, super fast trains. That's what people be thinking. Well, it doesn't change anything. You can't say that you know, firing the 350 nanometers of light would actually transform it. People don't get what light is. It's a compound ether perturbation modality. So traveling at 1/4 c and firing c, and you can actually calculate the amount of energy it takes to fire 3.4 eV of whatever intensity. I don't know what the intensity barrier would be to propel the craft, but that of course would depend on the change of the mass of the craft and what is the mass of the craft. Relatively lightweight, the more lightweight the better. Then the less 350 nanometer UV light would need to be fired to achieve 9 eV output for an ion propulsion drive. But that's still nearly 300% of over unity. So what the input would be would of course depend on the mass of the craft and the occupants and all the stuff, you know, the totality of that. That's not some sort of crazy theory in my head. That is over unity. I understand how the compound energy circuit of light works and what light actually is. Transverse electromagnetic, longitudinal rarefaction compression. It is a coaxial circuit. I always like to trick people. I need to buy some. It is really, really, really expensive. Most people know what a coax cable looks like. You got coax cable. Everybody got coax cable in your house. The super, super high energy coax cable. Regular coax cable, if you cut it in half, it's got a dielectric insulator and a center conductor, and it has a shield of copper or aluminum around it, and then it has another covering across the rebounding copper mesh, but it's all solid. You know, it goes plastic, copper mesh, plastic, center conductor. It's all solid. This stuff for super high energy transmission, you can go look this up on a Google search. Type in air coax. Air. It's two hollow copper tubes, one bigger, one a lot smaller. And it's actually suspended. The smaller copper tube is suspended inside the larger one via a helical plastic corkscrew, essentially. You know, it keeps it in the middle. That ultra low loss, ultra high energy circuit is empty. It's just one big tube and then a much smaller tube. They're both empty. 95% of that super high energy, super low loss transmission, and they use them at TV stations and radio stations. Like, the good stuff is like $90 a foot. So a foot of it will run you $100. I need to get some of that and use that as a demonstration model and actually talk about field modalities. Air coax, they call it. You go Google images of air coax. But it really is a light compression drive with nearly 300% of overunity. So, light being, of course, a compound ether perturbation modality, it doesn't behave like fired objects out of planes and trains via the countless Doppler effect analogies that everybody grew up with. There's a lot of great stuff, and you see my book is falling apart here. This is what he doesn't get, and this is on the premise of this. Doesn't lead to that, but he says, we've seen neither Maxwellian field equations. None of their solutions indicate an existence of causal links between electrical and magnetic fields, because electricity is a compound of dielectricity and magnetism. Therefore, we must conclude an electromagnetic field is a dual entity, which it is, and Charles Proteus Steinmetz says in Electrical Discharges, Waves, and Impulses that electricity is really simple. It's the compound product of dielectricity and magnetism. The electromagnetic field, i.e. light, EMR, or regular electricity, is a dual entity, always having an electrical and magnetic component. When he actually should have said, this is what he doesn't get. He doesn't understand field theory very well, even though he's quite a genius. He should have said, dual entity always having a dielectric and magnetic component, simultaneously created by their common sources, time variable electrical charges and currents. But this is genuine overunity. I've been thinking about this for quite some time. I thought, well, you're not really prepared enough on this to make the videos. Like, well, I have enough that I can make all the analogies to talk to people about this. But I tell you this now with absolute 100% certainty. My prediction, which came true, about high energy light manifesting matter, I showed people the links. Oh, look, new discovery. Like, I was telling you all about that for years. That this is genuine overunity propulsion. Roughly 280+% of overunity. How much needs to be applied to that light to actually move the mass and accelerate it, but traveling at something at 1/4 c, and of course is scalable, depends on what the craft is already traveling at. No different than booster rockets to actually get a shuttle close enough. Then, of course, the main tank takes you the rest of the way. You'd actually have to be boosted at a certain principle, somewhere about just over 0.2 of C. So boosted to 0.2 of C, and of course it's scalable the faster than the greater the energy output. It's anything 0.2 over C, the application of C means you have overunity. And that's absolutely fascinating. That means you would not have to have an enormous amount of energy to have an ion propulsion drive, or a light, what I'm calling a light compression drive, where you're actually generating hydrogen ion propulsion. Isn't that fascinating? Firing light, you're already traveling at 1/4 C, 350 nanometers, which is 800 plus terahertz, which is 3.4 eV. And you have spontaneous transformation, which is overunity, to 9 eV. Then you have genuine ion propulsion. And this, at nearly 300% of overunity, this means with not an enormous amount of energy. You know, just talking about this solar system itself, craft that would be, you know, super fast propulsion to Mars in a matter of well, less than a day, as opposed to currently, the predictions of, oh, it's going to take us a few months to get there, and, all this. What about less than 24 hours? This isn't some sort of crazy theory in my head. This is actual propulsion that would work, and it means you don't have to take an enormous amount of energy or fuel. You only need to be boosted at a certain fraction of C and the application of C to have overunity. Then you'd have ion propulsion drive. People don't get the Doppler effect. They think in terms of physical objects moving, which of course is highly rational and understandable. But people don't get that something that's already at C, something energy fired at C that's already traveling, let's say 1/4 C, for example, that you actually have the creation of hydrogen, super high energy light at circular frequency, which of course is already at propagation barrier. Then you have spontaneous energy manifestation for an ion drive propulsion. Isn't that neat? That's not science. Science fiction should make great use of this, but I'm not interested in science fiction. I haven't read science fiction since I was a young teenager. I'm interested in science fact, like what actually works. How do you test this? I don't need to test it to know that it works. Even Nikola Tesla talked about building things in his head and making them work in his head and knowing that they would work before actually sitting down to build them. This is the reason why Nikola Tesla attacked Thomas Edison for making like a gazillion different variations on the light bulb before, he found out. He called him a tinkerer, which, relative to what Nikola Tesla thought of Edison, is a huge insult. To call someone a tinker is like you're going to try and fail a billion times till you get it right. Tesla basically said that was a foolish approach to doing anything. You could think about it and build it in your head and work it in your head and know how to do it and save yourself a ton of time and much of your life force and life energy, which of course is precious, before actually sitting down and constructing it, because you know how to construct it, how it's going to work, and you've already tested it in your head. But this is real, and it's fascinating. I don't have the money to test this for obvious reasons. I don't even have the money to take a real vacation. I'm selling 3 acres of land, and by God, I'm actually going to use a little bit of that money, I hope. Got to sell it first, though, right? I have my realtor going to list it tomorrow. I need to take a real vacation, but I would love to test this. Very little input, enormous amount of output. I don't think or feel or have a theory in my head or a belief that this would work. I know it would work. And that is fascinating. This is where wisdom and discovery is its own reward. It really is. Whenever it is built, either while I'm alive or after I pass, the discovery of this by me, and this is my discovery, I didn't get this off of anybody, is wonderful. I love stuff like that. There's a lot of brain crushing and a lot of thought that was involved in this. Not that that's meant to impress anybody, but it impresses me because it's almost like science fiction, except it's reality. And the issue has always been energy output to achieve enormous speeds. But at nearly 300% over unity, it means it does not require taking a lot of energy with you to reach those enormous speeds. And of course the implication is travel to Mars in less than 24 hours, travel to the moon in only a few hours. All sorts of things are possible. It has to be in a frictionless environment, though. You're not gonna have that happen in ion propulsion drive in any sort of atmosphere, so it'd have to be. I can at least say, whether I'm alive when this is built or afterwards, that I discovered it. And that is wonderful. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this makes you think, too. And I hope you have a lovely week. Goodbye.